at the state representative's house at approximately 2:24 a.m. on Friday night. Again, he was dressed as a law enforcement officer, wearing a tactical vest and body armor, carrying a handgun and a flashlight, and wearing that same hyper-realistic silicone mask. Again, the images, as you can see on the screen, are haunting. Now, fortunately, the state representative was not home. She and her family were gone on vacation, and so Belter left. Belter then traveled to the home of a Minnesota state senator who lived in New Hope, Minnesota. He parked in the street in that same black SUV with the police license plate. At about 2:36 a.m. on Friday night, after learning of the shooting of Senator Hoffman, New Hope police dispatched an officer to conduct a wellness check on the state senator who lived in New Hope. When the New Hope officer arrived at the scene, she saw Belter's black SUV parked down the block with the lights on. The New Hope police officer believed that Belter was a police officer who had been dispatched to the scene to check on the status of the state senator. The New Hope police officer pulled up next to Belter in his car, rolled down her window, and attempted to speak with him. Belter did not respond. According to the officer, he just sat there and stared straight ahead. So the New Hope police officer, who had been dispatched to the scene, proceeded to the state senator's home, and she waited for other law enforcement to arrive. When they did, by the time they did, Belter had left the scene. Belter then traveled to Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, in the home of Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman. At approximately 3:30 a.m., Belter arrived at Representative Hortman's house in his black SUV with the police license plates. He parked in the driveway and left the emergency lights on his SUV flashing, as if he was a police officer. Belter approached Representative Hortman's home, again dressed as a police officer, wearing the tactical vest and body armor, and wearing that hyper-realistic mask. He was armed and carrying a flashlight. Before he entered the home, 2 Brooklyn Park police officers arrived at the scene. They too had been dispatched to check on Representative Hortman after learning of the shooting of Senator Hoffman. When they arrived at the scene, they saw Belter's black SUV parked in the driveway with the emergency lights flashing, and they saw Belter standing in front of the house several feet from the door. When Belter saw the officers get out of the car, he drew his weapon and began firing. He rushed into the house through the front door, firing into it. He repeatedly fired into the house, and when he entered, he murdered Representative Hortman and her husband, Mark. The Brooklyn Park police officers fired at Belter as he rushed into the home, but he escaped into the home and out the back. Officers recovered Belter's 9mm Beretta, along with the body armor and the mask, behind the home along his path of flight when he fled on foot. They later searched Belter's car, where they found 5 more firearms, including assault-style rifles and a large quantity of ammunition. Belter also had in his car notebooks containing a list of more than 45 Minnesota state and federal elected officials, including Representative Hortman. Now, Belter planned his attack carefully. He researched his victims and their families. He used the internet and other tools to find their addresses and names, the names of their family members. He conducted surveillance of their homes and took notes about the location of their homes. He also prepared in other ways. He concealed himself as a police officer, outfitting his black SUV with police lights and a police license plate, wearing a black tactical vest and body armor, carrying a police flashlight and a handgun. And of course, he wore that hyper-realistic silicone mask as seen on the surveillance videos. The video of his arrival and shooting of Senator Hoffman is truly chilling. Again, it's no exaggeration to say this is the stuff of nightmares. There's a photo of the firearms found in Belter's abandoned SUV. Based on these crimes, we brought a federal complaint charging Beltner with an array of federal charges. Counts 1 and 2 charge him with stalking. Count 1 charges him with stalking Representative Melissa Hortman using interstate facilities, and that's Title 18, United States Code 2261. The statutory penalties there are life in prison. Count 2, similarly, charges him with stalking State Senator John Hoffman using interstate facilities. The maximum penalty of that count is 20 years in prison. Counts 3 and 4 charge Belter with the murder of Melissa and of the Hortmans using a firearm in violation of 18 U.S.C. 924J. And these are punishable by a term of life imprisonment or even death. And counts 5 and 6 charge him with shooting the Hortmans and the Hoffmans using a firearm, and both of those counts also carry a maximum sentence of life in prison. Now, before I finish my remarks, I want to say a little bit about law enforcement and the manhunt that we've heard about the last 2 days. Over the past 48 hours, federal, state, and local law enforcement from throughout the state of Minnesota have worked together to carry out the largest manhunt in Minnesota history. Now, a lot has been said about law enforcement in recent weeks, but make no mistake, the men and women of our federal, state, and local law enforcement put their lives at risk and on the line to keep Minnesota safe. They work tirelessly, day and night, to make sure that the tragic events of Friday night ended without further violence or bloodshed. We owe them all a debt of gratitude, and they will forever have my respect and admiration. I'm going to turn it over to Special Agent Alvin Whitson from the FBI.
You're watching CBS News 24/7, where right there you heard from the Fed's mouth the elaboration not only on the federal charges, but also the characterization of the violence that happened, quote, stalked like prey. CBS News' Scott McFarland joins me now to break down everything that was talked about there. Scott, it's so chilling to learn the planning, the coordination, and the stops that happened in between those episodes of violence, even an encounter with police officers.
A lot of news already in that federal briefing. First of all, let's look at the top line here, Reed. There are now federal criminal charges in addition to the local charges, federal stalking and murder charges, which could qualify this case as a death penalty case. So that's in addition to what's being charged locally in Minnesota. What's more, according to the investigators, there was another potential target over the weekend. The Belter made a second stop in between the two in which he allegedly opened fire, and that the legislator he tried to visit second wasn't home. So this could have expanded the number of victims. And what's more, they characterized that silicone mask he was allegedly wearing as highly sophisticated and hyper-realistic, an indication, according to this news conference, of the level of planning that went into these attacks allegedly by Belter. Adding the federal charges is not at all redundant, because federal charges bring the might of the federal government, they bring the resources of the FBI, and they bring the prospect of a death penalty, which separates it from what's being charged locally.
Yeah, the pursuit and the purchase of that silicone mask that can be worn so close to the skin and completely change the architecture of the face would communicate, Scott, that he knew he'd be seen. He knew he'd be visible in person and on video and otherwise. But that encounter that he had with the New Hope police officer who stopped him, who talked to him, and he didn't talk back. It makes you wonder what that police officer is thinking today about that encounter. Chilling.
What's more, Reed, With a level of sophistication as just described by the federal investigators, one can surmise what was possible if they didn't make that welfare check, if the local police didn't check proactively on the second of the two victims on Saturday, because you had somebody who had not just a silicone mask, but the body armor, as they just described it, all the other things that went into this alleged plot. You could see how this could have gotten farther and wider if not for that welfare check, which ended in gunfire, which ended up with Belter leaving his car behind, according to investigators.
And 45 Minnesota officials written down in notebooks found. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so there's a broader sense of targets in this case, which has always made it distinctive that this was potentially the start of a broader alleged attack. But it also speaks to the bigger issue, where you have to get security enhancements for people farther and wider. They enhanced security immediately around some Minnesota legislators this weekend, CBS News learned. The governor requested, if not ordered, an end to those possible counter-protests that were being staged in Minnesota for No Kings events. But also, it speaks of what's happening next, where you have this increased sense that members of the elected legislatures in America, state and federal, need more protection because the next threat could be around the corner. And so many of these state legislators, so many of the federal legislators here, Reed, in Washington, don't get 24/7 protection, and they do indeed believe they're vulnerable.
Well, and it opens up the conversation as we get ready to dip back into that news conference about coordination between local, state, and federal police. We saw this in the assassination attempt against President Donald Trump. Scott, stay with me. Let's listen in a little bit more on what those federal officials are having to say today in Minnesota.
It's an incumbent upon all of us to put all the resources forward to hold that individual accountable, to seek justice, and to make sure that we are working together to show the community across Minnesota and the United States that political violence is never okay. We as a country are formed on the basis that we have political discourse and that we have debates ongoing on what we do and that we elect people day in, day out to represent us. And when somebody tries to undermine that, it's important for all of us to hold that person accountable so that we can move forward as a country and have a system in place that a representative government and that we provide the protections for those individuals and their families moving forward. And so I'm thankful for these charges today to move this forward and the great work of the United States Attorney's Office partnering with us to move forward on this. And with that, they'll take some questions.
So let's bring Scott McFarlane in, who also listened, as you did, in real time to those closing comments. And Scott, it just seems as we listen to these news conferences, whether it's state officials or federal officials, that they open and close with a call to tone down rhetoric because they are drawing that line between the rhetoric and political violence.
Yeah, and there's been such a sharp increase in the number of political violence investigations in America. This is not a small number, Reed. A 400% increase in threat investigations involving federal legislators just since 2019. It's hard to see that kind of increase in any context in anything, but a 400% increase is noteworthy. What's more, I think part of the mission of any prosecution, federal, state, or otherwise, is to have a deterrence effect. They want this case to be notorious. They want this case to be publicized. They want to get a message out that they're going to hold this individual accountable to potentially dissuade others from targeting elected leaders.
20-page complaint showing the case that is going to be part of the federal case against this person. Scott McFarlane, great to talk to you. CBS News also working to get the photos that were shown in that news conference to show all of the various stops and, of course, the silicone mask that they referenced. Great to talk to you, Scott. We know you have a very busy day ahead getting all of that. All right, when we come back, tensions continue, watching the skies over Iran and Israel, missiles volleying back and forth. And the big question, will President Trump want to get involved in this conflict by greenlighting bunker buster bombs that take Israel deeper into what they believe is Iran's nuclear underground operation? We'll be right back.
What happens when reporters take you inside the story?
I've been asking for over a year and a half for access into this place, and this is the first time we're getting it.
You get